All right, welcome everybody. Let's see, I need to, where are you? Trying to share the slide view over here. I can't see it. Let's see here. There we go. All right. So one of the things, so let me just kind of go through some of what we'll be doing over the next couple of days. So as you've probably have heard, next week we'll begin the midterm period for the next 2 weeks. So let me see. Next week, I believe, is the first and third year courses. Yeah, that's right. First and third. And then the following week will be the second and fourth. So since ours is a second and fourth, well, it's a second year course, our exam will be the following week. But I also understand that many of you probably are taking exams next week as well. So what we will do is today we'll talk about advanced normalization, so that we can get that squared away and out and done. Again, a lot of what we're going to talk about today, a lot of what we'll cover today, is not necessary for your group project. Most of you, once we've finished with that whole third normal form, many of you, your group project, you already had enough information to do all of your group project to the third normal form. For systems as simple as small as what you guys are doing for your group project, the third normal form is probably going to be enough to be able to get it into all this other higher normal forms as well. So we'll just spend some time today talking about advanced normalization. Probably not very long, but like I don't imagine we'll take the full 2 hours today. But tomorrow morning, what I'll do is in the first hour we will cover the upcoming midterm, like what you can expect to see from the midterm. We'll have that discussion so that anyone who can't join for the second hour tomorrow can go ahead and not be missing out on anything there. And since I expect that many of you probably will, for various reasons, for exams and stuff next week, I expect limited attendance next week. I didn't want to wait till next week to cover that, cover the midterm stuff. Okay, and we are going to get a little bit ahead, I think, because well, in a sense, ahead according to the syllabus. Because what I will go ahead and do is tomorrow, for the second hour, is we'll go ahead and introduce some of the database design information. So part of it's because there's really not enough time according to the syllabus to cover all of the database design things that we need to talk about in those 2 weeks, in the May 10th and May 17th 2-week periods. So I want to make sure that we cover it well. So that's what we'll do. Okay, so we're doing advanced normalization today. Midterm expectations tomorrow morning, and then introduce the database design phases, the conceptual, logical, and physical database design phases tomorrow in the second hour. Okay. All right, so let's get right to it. So you guys remember normalization. What are some key? Let me start getting the juices flowing. Start getting some your mind going. What are some of the key terms that you remembered from the normalization discussion in previous weeks? What's some of the main fundamental points we have to that are part of this whole normalization process? Good, yeah, functional dependencies, good, yeah, that's right. What's a functional dependency? What do you remember what that is? Right, we talked about partial dependencies, but what's a functional dependency? What does that mean? Like my kids need food and water and clothing in order to function, and they're dependent on me for food and water and clothing. Does that mean they're functionally dependent on me? Is that what that means? Okay. Ah, yes, very good. Very good. Simple explanation there, Fatih Furkan. Exactly. If we know what A is, and we can know B by knowing A, then B is functionally dependent on A. That's generally basically what it means, okay? We talked about how the different normal forms, how if you had a first normal form database, it could be just one table, right? But if we got from first normal form to second normal form, what type of functional dependencies were we looking for? What kind of dependencies were we trying to find to get from first to second? Right, partial dependencies. And what's a partial dependency? Right, Mustafa. Right, so what's the difference between those two? What's a partial dependency and what's a transitive dependency? So if B is dependent on A and AC. Yes. Okay, I see what you're saying. Yes. Yeah. So if there is a dependency that where the determinant, the thing on the left side of our dependency, if something on the right side is dependent on some part of it, it doesn't need the whole thing. It doesn't need the whole thing. Then that's a partial dependency. Right. Perfect. All right. Anyone else? What about transitive dependency? What's that all about? Right. So it's similar to the transitive property in mathematics. All right. So if A determines B and B determines C, therefore we can know that A determines C, right? And to get to third normal form, we're trying to get rid of any transitive dependencies in the same table, in the same relation or entity or whatever word you want to use to describe it. All right. All right. So we've gotten ourselves from unnormalized all the way through to the third normal form. And then we've been able to I also showed you last week how to take a third normal form database set of tables and generate an ER diagram from that. Right? So you guys are all set. You're all set for your group project. You still have a couple weeks until you have to turn that in. I think the due date is May 4th, if I'm not mistaken. All right, and hopefully, that's actually the day of the midterm, isn't it? That was totally by chance, totally accidental. Was not in. So great. Working on the group project will help you study for the midterm exam. All right. And then what I'll do is I'll give you guys some feedback on those group projects, and then you can modify them in time over the following couple of weeks to be able to give a good group presentation. All right. But I do want to at least give you some information about how this whole advanced normalization. So once we've got it to the third normal form, you might be thinking, oh, we've gotten rid of all chances of problems and update anomalies and all of that stuff. But there are higher forms, and especially for really complex systems, much larger systems. You know, you're going to be doing a lot of good work on your group projects, but it's likely it's not going to be as complex as a much larger system, such as a government financial system or a banking institutions system or an Amazon or something like that. And there are issues that some of those larger complex systems may have to deal with. And so some of these higher normal forms were developed in order for us to be able to handle some of those higher order problems. Okay. All right. So some of the things that will be talked about in this, the idea is multi-valued dependencies, and we'll see that in just a moment. We'll talk about, just briefly overview, fourth and fifth normal forms and the Boyce-Codd normal form. Okay. All right. So one part of what we want to develop as we start analyzing these systems is coming up with what we will call a complete set of functional dependencies. Because remember, we talked about and then we need to minimize the set to something that's manageable. So we talked about how, if we had, let me just give an example, like what Fatih Furkan up here wrote up here. If I said, if I have an A, B, C, D, and E column, and if I had this, okay, so I have this as an example functional dependency that might exist. It's likely this is not the complete set. Now, if this is it, if this is, okay, the combination of A, C determines B, D, and E, and there's no partial dependency in here, and there's no transitive dependency in here, then this is a complete set. But if we said, as Fatih Furkan suggested earlier, and let's say these also exist, right? Then now I don't need this first one that I've typed anymore. I can replace it with I can replace it with that. And now these the last three things that I've typed, that could be my whole set, and they infer this top one, right? Is that clear? Let me maybe say that. Trying to figure out how I can do this where you can see it. I'm having a hard time thinking through how to show it. We don't need this top one that I wrote, this AC determines BDE, because the B part of that is implied by A determines B. The D on the right-hand side is implied by the C determines D. And really, this last one is the only one that I need to say for A, C being the primary key. Okay, where A, C determines E, and the other two are implied. So these last three things that I've typed are really all that I need to have a full, complete set of functional dependencies. That top one is no longer necessary. Okay. Right. So we want to reduce the set, but that one is still possible. There's all kinds of functional dependencies we can write. We could say A, C determines B, A, C determines D, E, L, B. Right. So all of these are functional dependencies that exist, but not all of them are necessary for us to keep track of, right? The first two, for example, are implied by the last two. So we don't need all that. So we want to reduce as much as possible to only the functional dependencies that are important, that are necessary, right? So we want to reduce that set down to a manageable size so that we can work with it. Okay. And so this is a lot of text, but basically what we're getting at with this is we want to come up with a set of axioms, a set of rules that we can use. It's kind of like if you think about mathematical identities and mathematical rules like the commutative property, the associative property, and things like that. That's what we're really trying to come up with for how to minimize our set. Okay, so here are some of our inference rules, Armstrong's axioms, right? So if B is a subset of A, then A determines B. Well, that makes sense. Let's see. So let's say in this example up above, A, B, C, D, and E, this would be like saying A, E determines A, right? Because if the thing on the right-hand side is a subset of the thing on the left-hand side, then the left determines the right. That makes sense. I mean, there's, combination of two columns determines what the value of one of them is, right? And the thing about these identities and axioms, just like in mathematical identities, like 1 times 0, anything times 0 equals 0, and stuff like that, a lot of times they sound very commonsensical. They're kind of like, well, right? Like, who would think otherwise? Like, that just makes complete sense. But we use these identities for manipulating the set to make it reduced. Okay. Another one here, this augmentation. If A determines B, then the combination of A and C determine B and C. That makes sense also. All right. Okay. Transitivity. We've talked about the transitive dependency. Same idea. If A determines B and B determines C, then A determines C. That's, again, fairly straightforward. Okay. A determines A. Decomposition. If A determines B and C, then we can write that separately out as A determines B and also that A determines C. No, okay. All right. So you can write them out separately, or together. Okay. And then the reverse is also true. If we can write them out separately like this, then we could also write them together. And I think this might be the last one. Yeah. If we have A determines B and C determines D, then the combination of the two, we can use them to determine these over here. And the reason why this becomes important is because many of our functional dependencies will initially look like this, right? But this concept of that partial dependency, we will bring it in and we will we'll write them out separately like this, and then we don't need this one anymore. Right? Just like I showed you back over here where this A, C determines B, D, and E, we don't really need B, D over here. Just having A, C determines E was enough. All right. So these are some of our inference rules. Right. So what we want is we want to have a full set of functional dependencies that covers all functional dependencies, or either covers them explicitly, or by using our inference rules we can discover them. Okay. All right. We would like to have every dependency in X, right? Every dependency in X having a single attribute on the right-hand side. So we won't have these A, C determines B, D, E, right? We will separate them out as A, C determines B, A, C determines D, A, C determines E. But then as we showed below that, yeah, A determines B. We don't need A, C determines B. Okay. So we want to have this, every dependency has a single attribute on its right-hand side. All right. If we have a minimal set of dependencies, then we cannot A determines B. If that's in X, if that's in our minimal set, we cannot replace it with something else on the left-hand side where C is a subset of A. If there exists some subset, some lesser columns, some fewer columns that are part of A that also determine B, then we do not have a full functional dependency, and therefore we do not have a minimal set of functional dependencies. Okay. And if we can remove any dependency from X and still have a set of dependencies that's equivalent to X, that still has all the things covered, then we do not have a minimal set of functional dependencies yet. So we need to reach a point where every dependency that exists in our set is required in order to fully flesh out the system, fully flesh out all of the functional dependencies. We need to make sure that any A determines B must exist without a subset of A being possible on the left-hand side. We need to have every functional dependency has a single attribute on the right-hand side. Okay. Sounds like it's a lot of work, right? But what we're trying to do is we're trying to get to a minimal set of functional dependencies to fully define all of the functional dependencies that exist. Okay. All right. So Boyce-Codd basically the idea is that in a third normal form, we could have a situation where we have a functional dependency, A determines B. In the third normal form, this could exist if B is one of the primary key's attributes and A is not a candidate key on its own. Okay, it's rare. Okay, this is not going to happen frequently. Okay. Boyce-Codd requires that if this dependency is going to remain, if we're not going to make another relation out of this, right, then A must be at the very least a candidate key. It doesn't have to be a primary key, but it must be a candidate key. Okay. So like I said, it's quite rare. Some possible violations would require that the candidate keys overlap. It can contain more than one composite candidate key, but that's so rare. One of the things I've mentioned before is usually tables have a single column primary key. And for a lot of systems, if a suitable primary key cannot be found through one or two columns, many systems will just create some type of integer-based primary key. Your student number is something that was created in order to act as a primary key in a table. Right. Same thing with your TJ Kimlik number. Same thing with your bank account number if you have a bank account. All right, these are all examples of things where there was no good, suitable single or double attribute key that could be used in order to uniquely identify something, to uniquely identify you as a student, to uniquely identify you as a citizen or a resident of this country, something to uniquely identify your bank account. Like those are all things that they couldn't figure out. The not in a bad way. It's not like they weren't being smart or anything. It was just that there was no good set of attributes that could act as a primary key. And so they created one. All right. And it happens in many, many systems. All right. Okay. Let's review up to Boyce-Codd. Okay. Because this actually includes an example, if I'm not mistaken. This actually includes an example of a Boyce-Codd problem. All right. So here we have this property inspection report. This is how did we get this? We got this through we called it fact-finding techniques. Anybody remember what type of fact-finding technique this would fall under? It's a long time ago. You got to think back a few weeks. Interviewing? Did we interview? Research? Maybe. I'm thinking something else. Right. Documentation, because this is something that oh, what's it called? This is something that our Dream Home company has on hand. They generated this inspection report for a property number, and basically created this report for us to look at, for us to understand some of the properties, some of the attributes that they would keep track of. Okay, so just off of here, we can see how many different attributes do you see here? How many attributes? Yeah, I'm thinking 8. 8, yeah, 8 sounds good. How many tables do you think this should be? No looking ahead in the slides. Let's take a look. All right, let's take a look. All right. Okay. So first, we have this in the format of remember, this is what we call the unnormalized set. Remember that this has property information, and then this would be the inspection information. All right. So we take this unnormalized set, because notice that this cell has multiple values. This cell has multiple values. There's a couple of different ways that we can resolve this. Remember, we talked about this last week. One possibility would be to take this that we see that kind of, oh, this goes with this. This goes with this. We could say these two columns can become their own table, their own property table. Right? And then this over here could become its own table called the inspection table or inspection info table or something like that. Okay. The other possibility is to make a single table, all right? Make a single table where we just unmerge these cells and fill in and make a copy of these values here, okay? We have a staff property inspection table, and then we start trying to figure out, okay, what are some, what is it? What are some functional dependencies we need to identify? Okay. What are functional dependencies here? Let's see. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. Okay. What are some functional dependencies? I've hidden them from your view. What were some functional dependencies? We'll go back here. Sure. Property number determines property address. Sure. Let's first do this. Let's ask what would make for a primary key in this? What are some possible primary keys? Or what are some candidate keys, I guess? Staff number? Is staff number a candidate key for this table? Remember what a candidate key is. A candidate key uniquely identifies the row. So if I said, I want the row that has SG14 in it. Oh, that's a problem. Yeah. Let me modify one thing I said, by the way. When I said it uniquely identifies the row, that's because no two rows can be exactly the same. So no two rows can be exactly the same in a relational database table. So that's why the candidate key uniquely identifies the row. All that a candidate key is really is something where the values in those columns, the combination of those columns, determines the values for every other column in the table. So if there was an exact duplicate of an entire row, Like if maybe this PG4 and the date and the time and the address and the comments and the staff number, the staff name, the car registration, if all of that was the same from one row to another, then you could have a duplicated candidate key. All right, let's see here. Property number, I date, I time you're suggesting. Property number, I date, I time. So the combination of the property number, the date, and the time determines where it is. Yeah. Determines what was wrong with the place on that day and that time. Sure. And the staff number, who was there and did that, and their name and the car. Sure. That sounds good to me. Now I can tell you, I'm gonna show you this one. Where are I? There you go. Where it's, hold on. Okay, I'm going to show you this. They, for what they did, they stated that the number, property number, and the date were the primary key. That these two columns on there together form the primary key for the rest of this. Why do you think they left the time out? Because I'm thinking like you, Fatih Furkan, I'm thinking like you, that I date, I time, but they left the time out. Why, what do you think that means? Tarana, to answer your question, the reason why we can have the same staff number multiple times is because what does this record represent? It represents this person using this car to go to this property to inspect it on this day. So a repeat of the staff number, staff name here, the repeat of the staff person simply means they went and inspected a different property on a different day. Or they inspected the same property on a different day. You know, either way. But just means that this row represents a particular inspection of a property. Is what property was it? What day and time was it? Who did it? What car was used? And what were the comments? Okay. So why do you guys think that they put in the time into the primary key? Or sorry, why do you think they did not put the time into the? So Fatih Furkan, I'm thinking, like I said, I'm thinking like you. Like I would initially say, yeah, property number, date and time, but yet, for whatever reason, they chose not to. What do you think? Yeah, what I'm thinking is that they probably are assuming the same. Remember, this is a property being inspected by a person using a car, right? Using a car to get there. I'm thinking what they're thinking is the same person is not going to inspect the same property on the same day more than once, right? That if I've got the same property, the same date, and the same person, it shouldn't be, they shouldn't go in the morning to inspect the property and then go in the afternoon to inspect the same property again, right? I'm thinking that's what they're, that's the restriction they're putting here. What if? What if they do? What if they do go inspect it twice? Well, then this system wouldn't be able to handle it as it is. And this is a good example. Guys, this is a great example of when we are unsure. Right, exactly. What if the staff could visit the same property the second time? You know, perfect question, Mustafa. And you know, this is a great example. Your question is a great example of something that when things are not totally clear, when we're not quite sure, when there's more than one way to design a system, we go and we talk with our customer, you know, we talk with our client and we say, and we say, how would you like this to be done? All right. Because customer may not be thinking about this stuff, right? Okay. All right. Someone also said, I believe someone also mentioned this one. We'll call that a partial dependency, right? Because the address is determined by the property number. Yep. Is this all of our functional dependencies? Did we catch them all? Or are there some others? Let's go back here. Ah, staff number, staff name. Yes. Okay. So based on our choice of primary key, Fatih Furkan, based on our choice of primary key, which could be either property number, date, and time, or just property number and date, either one. Based on our choice of primary key, what type of dependency is that staff number, staff name? What special name would we give that? Remember? Right. Perfect. That's a type of transitive dependency. Okay. Now we haven't quite gotten all of our lesser dependencies. There's a couple more that aren't necessarily easily seen at first glance, and that happens. But as we're trying to figure out all of our possible functional dependencies, some others that we might determine in order to get our higher normal forms. One like this, where we think the date and the staff determines the car. Okay. What we're saying here is that on a particular day, the car can belong to a particular staff person, that they will drive the same car all day long, and no one else will be given that car on that day. All right. So that's another possible one that wouldn't be readily seen without looking at the text, because I think the textbook on this one kind of describes this a little bit more so that you can understand that. Okay. Some other possible candidate keys. A couple of more candidate keys: that a car on a particular day and time, right, can go to a specific property and have all this other stuff as well. Right. So we're saying a car, the combination of car, date, and time, which makes sense, right? You can't have a car be in two different places at the same date and time, right? Now the same car could go to the two different properties. There's no problem with that on the same day, but the car at a date and time cannot exist in two different places at the same time, right? Maybe in science fiction it could. Okay. And in the same way, Another thing that can't exist in two different places at the same date and the same time would be our staff person, right? Our staff person cannot be at one property at a particular date and time and at an entirely different property at the same date and time, right? If somehow they were at two different places at the same date and time, then they could probably rule the world, I guess, right? I would love to be able to be in two different places at the same date and time, right? Okay. So we've identified our functional dependencies, and again, this is not even an exhaustive list. There's lots of more functional dependencies that might come out, right? But the reason why we were identifying other candidate keys is because what we're going to see is that, so for example, this property number is one of the, what is it? One of the attributes that's a part of our primary key, and yet it is a determined value as part of another candidate key. All right, so there's an overlap of candidate key and primary key here, and so this could cause a Boyce-Codd problem, right? So what we'll do is, since we've run a little bit over here, we'll go ahead and take our break, and then when we come back, we'll look at the kind of the flow chart of how to go from one table, staff property inspection, to be able to create our multiple tables that we'll need for our normalized database. Okay, so we'll come back in 10 minutes. So what is that? 2:35. 2:35. We will come back and continue on with our discussion.